Hello, welcome to the first setup in Project B, a custom bullet journal for my very best friend. If you haven't seen my introductory video, I highly recommend it because it explains everything in depth. But in a nutshell, this is a bullet journal that I've customized 100% for my very best friend, and this is the setup for January. So we obviously had to do a B theme. The project's name is B because my friend's nickname is B and her aesthetic revolves around bees, so duh. And originally it was going to be for December because her birthday is in December, but honestly neither one of us wanted to wait that long, so we brought it back to January, so it would be the first theme in the journal. With it being the first setup and everything, there was a lot of trial and error when it comes to the actual setup, but also the filming and editing, so bear with me. But we are going to start with the cover page as always. I decided on a classic B illustration. I've done this one multiple times in the past, usually with just a fine liner. This time I decided to use gouache paint instead. So using yellow ochre and lemon yellow for the yellow stripes and then black for the black ones, using a large round brush. Now, I did this back in June of 2024, so I can't remember all of the details. I have written most of them down, but I'm bound to have forgotten a few things. But a large round brush, I love those. And using a lot of short curved strokes, almost like a parenthesis shape, if you will. And I did this for the entire body, so all of the stripes and also the legs and arms and all of that. And I made sure to overlap the black and yellow striped sections because, they are hairs or fur or whatever they are not perfect stripes. And I made sure to maintain the roundedness of the body of the bee, and it gave it a fluffy texture. I worked on this for much longer than necessary, doing multiple layers so it doesn't look flat, and I love how this looks. I have found out that animals are something I seem to paint well. For the wings, I wanted to give them a translucent look somehow, so I used an extremely watered down version of the yellow, really like just a hint, to give the area a tint so it's not just black. And then I actually used a gold jelly roll gel pen and scribbled some of the pigment on a piece of scrap paper, then picked it up with a wet brush before giving the wing area a complete wash with it. This removed a lot of the pigment and only kept the shimmer, so it looks transparent and glitters in the light. I am obsessed with how it turned out. I especially love watching it dry in the footage. I am very tempted to do some type of fairy theme just so that I can use this technique again. Anyway, after it dried, I fixed some areas and added shimmer to the body of the bee before I moved to the rest of the cover page design. The original idea was to have some honeycomb pattern on the upper right and down left areas of the bee. Not always a complete hexagon, but with how I ended up doing this, that just wasn't possible. So when B and I were shopping for supplies for this project, we discovered gold leaf paper for gilding and such, and really liked the idea of using it in this bullet journal. I just don't think either one of us realized how messy it is to use, which is also why I had to repeat this cover page like 3 times. So originally, like I said, we were gonna have a honeycomb pattern, not always a complete honeycomb, maybe just some outlines and such. And at first I tried to put down the glue directly onto the cover page and put the gold leaf on top of it, wait for it to dry, then scrape the excess off. That didn't work at all. It was really messy and it didn't give neat results. So I ended up redoing the cover page, tried a different technique. That didn't work either. So what I ended up doing is I grabbed a piece of black paper, not the one in the journal, and then just glued full sheets of the gold leaf on it, left it for a few days to dry completely, then cut out hexagon shapes out of that and glued it onto the cover page. It didn't turn out like how I imagined it, but it is beautiful nonetheless. Moving on to the monthly log. Now, obviously, I had to do a hexagon calendar. It is just a requirement that if you do a bee theme, you do some type of hexagon layout, whether it be for a calendar, weekly log, whatever it is. So I did that here. As soon as we chose the bee theme, I knew that I'm gonna do a hexagon calendar, and it doesn't really line up perfectly in rows, but all for the aesthetics, okay? Here I used actually gold acrylic and a really large round brush to do all of the hexagons. At first I thought I was gonna do each hexagon at a time, but honestly the first one didn't look neat or even at all, so I ended up doing what is most comfortable, which is do all of the same facing strokes at a time. So for example, all of the top halves of the hexagon or top strokes all at once, then the diagonal ones that are right angled, then left angled, and all of that, so it goes by easier and faster. I did mix the gold with some water, and actually I made a mixture of the gold paint that is really watered down and used that to wet the brush in between the strokes if I needed to, so that way I don't lose any pigment. I just add some wetness to it, but it is still shimmery and pigmented, if that makes any sense. And I kept it in this tight seal container, so even though I worked on this over multiple days, that mixture didn't dry out. I did the mistake of using my clear paint palette to do this, and I am still dealing with the aftermath of that, which is I cannot get this acrylic paint out of my clear paint palette, and it doesn't really look nice. It is coming together beautifully, and then I also wanted to add some like honey drip, so I added those sporadically, just coloring them fully with the gold. And I just adore how this turned out on black paper. Beautiful. This gold paint is probably my favorite type of gold ever, so no wonder it looks beautiful. Then I added a very miniature bee at the bottom of the calendar using the same paints and same technique, but on a very small scale, so a lot of the details are not really captured all that well, but it's fine. It gives the illusion that I wanted, which is okay. And then I used some gold to make like a trail with some loop-de-loops of the bee, and I actually do end up adding a quote beside this later on because the area felt empty, and I actually asked my friend to give me these quotes so I can make sure she's gonna actually like these. To add the names of the days of the week on top of the calendar, I just used a white gel pen and my regular cursive, doing faux calligraphy to get the thicker and thinner strokes with the white gel pen, as I said, and then numbered the calendar, and I have figured out beforehand where each day is gonna go, so I had that off frame and was just copying the numbers down. For the other side of the spread, I did some sort of dashboard. Now, my friend is not a bullet journaler, so all of these things were left to me, and so I added the sections that I thought she would like or needed, and also left a couple of them empty in case she wants to add something that I didn't think about or didn't know she needed, if she ends up ever using this. Originally I made 4 rectangles and thought that was gonna be it, but then I had the idea of making them into elongated hexagons, so I just made those slanted corners, if that is the correct way to describe them. And originally I outlined them with white, but this time I went ahead with the gold paint and did that, and I'm actually really pleased with how straight looking these lines were. I did many thin short strokes, but they look really good. And then I did more of those miniature tiny bees scattered about with gold pathways and loop-de-loops to add something more to the spread. before adding the titles. I think I did cash flows and maybe work or something. I'm not sure what exactly happened. Probably forgot to turn on my camera when I, switched angles, but I don't have all of the process for these mini bees filmed, but you get the gist. It's the same steps, really blurry and on a very small scale. When all was said and done, I came back to add the quote, which says, "I am just a totally selfish working bee creating my little projects under the calendar." Now we are getting to the weeklies. We are actually working with the first half and half spread, so one side is black paper, the other is gray, and this first one is a partial weekly because the year starts on a Wednesday, and this is the first bullet journal for my friend, so she's not gonna have a December setup where these days are included if she likes that. I personally don't, so I made a partial weekly. So on the right page is gonna have Wednesday to Saturday. On the left page is a decorative spread. And at this point, I actually purchased a set of bee-themed stencils. It had a bunch of bee silhouettes, honeycomb in different sizes, honey drip in different styles and such. It is really great. I will link it below. And I used one of the bee stencils here to do the outline of the bee, but then I used the same paints and the same technique to do the bee, trying to round it a bit because in this stencil the body of the bee is a little slimmer. I wish I had gone with the same bee as I used in the cover page, but when I was setting this up, I didn't want to use the same bee shape over and over, so I did this, but I wish I didn't. Anyway, for the rest of the spread, I did a bunch of loop-de-loops and swirls in the gold paint, and at first I thought these were going to be thin and even and delicate, but they were not. They were definitely on the thicker side because it's just difficult to make them of even thickness using a brush when they go in different directions and such. So that was a lengthy process, but a fun one definitely. And the key here is to just flip the journal around for the most comfortable position to do the swirls. This idea didn't come to mind quickly. I actually struggled to figure out what I'm gonna do with this spread, but I found an image on Pinterest that I really liked, and of course I will have it on the screen. So I just replicated that, and we're actually gonna come back to this later to add a quote. My idea originally was to do some type of pattern with bees rather than honeycombs, but I didn't really want to do a pattern and I couldn't find the right image, and then the weekly after this is gonna have a full honeycomb pattern. So I looked further, found the image that I showed, and went with that, and it is beautiful. On the right page, I just sectioned the page into 4 and then made small hexagons where I'm gonna write the day of the week, and I outlined it with gold but left one of the sides unlined with the gold so that I can start writing the day of the week in the middle of the hexagon, if that makes sense. And I just used a calligraphy pen in a medium nib, I would say. It's not the smallest, definitely. And I just use my regular cursive to letter the days of the week. And then I did this weird thing where I did a partial lining of the sectioning lines, you could say. So a little plus sign in the middle with the gold. I hated that so much. In the end, I just used a white paint pen and did a thick line in both directions to cover it entirely, and that made it look nice and also balanced it because we're gonna add the quote using white ink. And then the quote that I chose for this spread says, "Hope is the only bee that makes honey without flowers." And I just used a white gel pen to ink it in with my regular cursive, and then doing faux calligraphy to get the thicker and thinner strokes. Now for the next weekly, which is actually going to be a double weekly, which means it has 2 weeks, an entire week on each side of the spread. And you already saw what I did, because I did half of the spread, because this is a lengthy process as is. So I've said it in the beginning of the video, it is a requirement to do some type of a hexagon layout, and I already did a hexagon calendar, but I really wanted just a full page of the hexagon or honeycomb pattern with, blanker areas to actually put in the daily logs and such. So that is exactly what I did. It took a lot of math to transfer in the pattern and also leave areas for the days of the week. I actually did 6 sections, so with a joined weekend, and just using my gold paint and my large round brush did all of the strokes until I had a beautiful complete honeycomb pattern, and the result is breathtaking. It is beautiful, stunning, gorgeous. I love it. I need to do a bee theme for myself, and I will absolutely do this again, even though it was a very time-consuming process. I also have to say, even though I love the look of gold on black paper, gold on gray paper just is on a different level, okay? It is beautiful. I don't know why, but I love this combination the most. Although these clips are sped up by X10, it is still a very long clip. However, it is really satisfying to see it come together, so I'm just gonna keep the clips in with some music to enjoy it. And then to add the headers for each section, I used the same brush pen and lettered the initials in some bouncy calligraphy, and that concludes this weekly spread. For the last weekly, this is also a double weekly. I started with a half of it already made. So I had a mini hexagon calendar, and I just lettered January horizontally beside it, and then I will go back later and fill in the 2 weeks this weekly spans, and then we're gonna actually start on the right page with the bee. I used the same stencil that I used for the quote page on the first week. That is why I was flipping back to that spread to make sure I put the colors in the right place. But this time I decided to use markers, and the reason for this is we originally wanted to use different paper colors so that we can use different materials on each one and just have fun and maximize the possibilities of a theme, right? And so I decided to use these 2 water-based markers here, and this is my least favorite bee of them all. I really don't like how it looks, and I wish I had gone with paint instead. I did do the mini bee on the left page using the same markers, but somehow it looks great there. Here, not so much. I also used a fine liner to do the black areas, and I wish I didn't do that. This is not my favorite bee at all. But one of the stencils that came with that pack has this layout with 7 sections of really large hexagons, and so I did that for these. Just laid them differently so it is not a perfect mirror of each other, and then outlined them with a fine liner. This one is from Unipen, and lettered the names of the days of the week using the gold jelly roll. And I also used the gold jelly roll to fill in the last 2 weeks of the calendar that this layout encompasses, as I've mentioned. I also used the gold pen to do the paths, and they are not very visible because this is white paper, but when the light bounces off of them, you can see them. I actually do end up also adding quotes to this page, and I did another mistake here that makes me like this spread less, which is use my, at the time, newly acquired fountain pen, and I did not know that the ink smears if I, erase the penciling underneath, even if I let it dry. So there's a little bit of smearing, and yeah, I really wish I went with a more reliable pen. But we have Bee to the Blossom under the mini bee, and then Float like a butterfly, Sting like a bee under the larger bee on the right page. Moving on to the last spread in this setup, which is the monthly review and also an extra spread later beside it. This time I'm actually going to show you how I used the gold leaf to make some honey drip here. I also really wanted to do some honey drip, and I wish I did it on some other layouts as well. Now that I think about it, and this thought is useless because the journal is already with B, but I wish I added this on the previous spread, and it would have probably made things look nicer. But yes, I used water-based glue that I got from Shein because gilding glue is expensive, and I don't think I'm gonna use this technique again. And I put it in this drip thing that I have, just so it is easier to, access, because it comes in like a tub, I guess, or you could say. And then I have the gold leaf, and I cut them into smaller sections. Then using a very small nail art brush, I pick up the glue from the drip thing and, lay it out onto the paper where I have already sketched the honey drip thing. And then I do a section at a time, and the key here is to just not touch the gold leaf with your hands at all. So I utilize the paper that the gold leaf comes sandwiched in, and then I lay it out onto my fan brush and flip the fan brush to lay out the gold leaf onto the paper. And you can see how I did it. It is best explained visually rather than with words, but it is very complicated and very lengthy, and it needs a lot of time to dry. We're not gonna touch this until 3 days, maybe 4. I might just leave it a week. Now to the messy part. This is multiple days later. I used a fluffy brush. I sacrificed one of my makeup brushes for this. I have other better ones, so it's fine. And you just have to scrape off the gold leaf that wasn't stuck with glue. And I tried to put a piece of paper under this, but it got on my hands and it stayed on my desk for days afterwards. So this is just very messy. I ended up missing a few spots, so I had to pull out all the things again to fill those and leave them for a couple of days to dry before I scraped them and, finally got the result that I wanted. And it is beautiful. It is gorgeous. I love how it looks. It's just I don't know if it's worth it. For the layout itself, I did a big rectangle with slanted edges, so it mimics a very big hexagon, if you will. And I used a thick fine liner for this. I think this was size 8 because I wanted it to be a bolder line. And then at the top, I don't remember where I saw this idea, or actually maybe it was from a review video from Mark Your Pages. He did a review of a printed notebook, I think, and they had something similar, and I thought it was interesting and added here. So it is rate your month. In the inspo it was rate your week, but I did it here for an entire month because I don't have space for it on the weeklies. And I did stress levels, energy levels, general mood, sleep quality, productivity, social connection, motivation, self-esteem, and health and wellness. And then I did 5 hexagons underneath because there's the perfect stencil for that, of course. And this way, because there are 5 weeks in the month, she can color them in or weight them in however she wants for each week. So it is a weekly tracker but on the monthly review, if that makes sense. And I just used the brush pens to do that and then separated them with a white gel pen. I come back later with a thicker paint pen to make the lines bolder. Underneath, I made a few more sections. I did more of these rectangles with slanted edges to mimic a hexagon, and I just wrote currently loving and cash flows. With the cash flow section, I added subsections for total spend, total earned, and total saved. Then I'm just redoing the lines with the thick paint pen. Lastly, I added 3 more sections down below for highlights, challenges, and gratitude. For the other side of the spread, each month I try to include one special spread that is not necessarily repeated in the other themes, and this time it is a playlist. So we are starting with a bee painting, small painting, and I will put it on the screen. It is absolutely gorgeous. I love it. I just didn't do it justice on this. And I think my first issue is I was working on tan paper and I haven't worked with it before, so I for some reason didn't comprehend that the colors are gonna look different, and so it is much more mustardy, the yellow stripes and such. And then I did another huge mistake later on, but it is just, you know, a silhouette of a flying bee with a bunch of hexagon pattern behind it that I did using the gold acrylic paint. It started off real good, but then when I was doing the wings, I ended up outlining them with acrylic gold, and that just ruined it for me. I don't like it. A lot of people wouldn't notice and they would say it looks great, but I personally don't like that I did that. There's also something that I haven't mentioned yet, which is before this spread, which has 2 tan pages, there was a half and half spread before it where the right page was tan paper and the left page was white paper, and I didn't want to work with that, so I simply glued them together. And this is also the case for the 5th and 4th weekly, which had 2 white pages. Before it, there was a half and half spread where the right page was white paper, left page was gray paper, and I also didn't want to work with that, so I glued them shut. For the actual playlist layout, I did the same thing as the review page, which is a really large box with slanted edges, so it is hexagon-like shape, and then wrote, besides the B, wrote January playlist, and then did a bunch of like play button things, you know, a classic playlist layout with white ink and black ink, and then my friend can write whatever songs she ended up binge listening to in January. And the way I did these, you know, sections for each song is really simple. So one line that I did with the paint pen, I don't recommend this one, or maybe it's just the one that I was using, because I needed to do a few layers and that smeared a little bit. So as a result, I needed to make them a little thicker. Then I made a dot in random intervals, like to represent where the song has progressed to. Then for the play button, stop button, and those, I made a circle and then inside of it drew an arrow or a stop sign. Not a stop sign, but like, you know, the sideways equal sign, alternating between the two. Then drew two arrows or, you know, sideways triangles facing opposite directions, and then just a line on the point of each triangle. Very simple. And at this point, I hadn't realized what the issue with the fountain pen ink is, so I used it here again to do the quote at the top of the playlist section, and it says, "Bees are garden batteries." But this is it for the setup of January in Project B, doing a bee theme. It is absolutely gorgeous. I love how it looks, despite all the things that didn't go as planned, and I love this. I also love the play on the different paper colors. It is perhaps my favorite part of this custom bullet journal. Definitely let me know what you thought of this down below and what your favorite part of it was, and leave a bee emoji as well to let me know you got to this point. Subscribe and stay tuned for more, because videos like this are going to be coming out each month. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.